1. This particular incident happened to me 4 years ago. Even though it's not long or super scary, at the time it did freak me out. For context, I'm a 20-year-old female, but at the time of this event, I was 16 years old. My family and I had the tradition to buy food instead of cooking at home one weekend out of every month. We would order, then my dad and I would pick it up. We did this since I was very young, and it was one of my favorite family traditions growing up. Anyway, this particular night we decided to eat pupusas. If you don't know what they are, basically it's a tortilla with cheese, pork, and other things inside. 10 out of 10 would recommend. It was around 9 p.m. in the winter time, so it was already dark out. My mom called the restaurant, placed our order, and my dad and I were off to pick up our food. Now, to get to the restaurant there is a main road, but there is also a shortcut that goes through some abandoned buildings. And really no cars ever drive by there. My dad decided to take the shortcut to and from the restaurant. On our way to the restaurant everything was fine and we made it there safely. So my dad gets our food, pays, comes back to the car, and we begin our drive back home. We're entering the shortcut when we see a car parked in the middle of the empty road. To be more precise, it was a black van, and it was turned off, blocking the path. Both my dad and I were confused as hell, but my dad wanted to get out of the car and go see if the car maybe broke down and someone needed help. The second I saw this car, though, I had a really bad feeling about it, and I told my dad not to. He insisted everything would be fine, but I had a horrible feeling about the whole situation. So I begged my dad to please stay in the car, and I guess he realized how worried I was because he obliged and decided not to leave our car. We were debating whether or not to do a U-turn and get back to the main road, or simply to drive past this car, even though it would mean driving on the sidewalk. That's when we see a guy get out of the driver's side of the car and begin walking toward us. I tell my dad to just drive past this car fast because it would take longer to do a U-turn at this point. The road was extremely narrow. So he drives by the car, and that's when I sort of get a good look at this guy. I say sort of because I could only see the parts of him that were illuminated by the streetlight. He was wearing all black, and wearing a ski mask, and had something in his hand. At first I couldn't tell what he was carrying, but as I squinted, I realized it was a butcher knife. The guy was stood by the driver's side of the car and watched us drive past him. When we were almost out of this road, we see the same van turn on and drive the opposite direction of where we were going. I don't really know what this guy's intentions were. I don't know if he was trying to rob people or had darker intentions. But it scared me for a long time, and whenever we ordered food from this restaurant, I begged my dad to take the main road, even though it was a longer trip. We did not contact the authorities, although I wish we had, because 1, we didn't have a good description of the guy, and 2, we didn't get the license plate of the car he was driving. I tried to search up any news articles to see if the guy was caught or if he ever did end up harming or robbing anyone, but nothing came up. We've since moved away from that area and are no longer anywhere near that restaurant, and to my knowledge, those abandoned buildings are now in the process of being demolished and turned into an apartment complex. Looking back on it, it was definitely scary, but not as bad as other encounters I've had. Even so, that event stuck with me for a long time, and I'm eternally grateful to whatever knocked some sense into my dad and made him realize that going up to that van was a bad idea. So yeah, weird creepy dude who was carrying around a freaking butcher knife. Please, let's never meet again. 2. I went to Paris on my gap year back in 2017. I was there for about 4 days, and it was April, around the time of the Champs-Élysées attack, where 3 policemen were shot. I happened to witness this from inside the store when it happened, and had to walk back to my hostel after. I was 19. Anyway, my second day there, I think, I had tickets to the Louvre. I set off in the morning, extremely excited and not at all daunted by anything. It was my first time traveling alone out of the country in general. I'm British. I loved it. I had Google Maps out. Walking the whole way there was about 45 minutes, but I didn't mind. About 15 minutes in, I'm walking and a guy notices me, calls out a whistle and smiles at me. Okay, I would be annoyed, but I'm in Paris, who cares? Carry on walking. A few minutes later he appears next to me, smiling and saying hi. He's about early to mid-20s, very tanned skin, not sure of the nationality. I say hi back, surprised, thinking he must have been following me. strange. We begin to talk. I tell him I'm here traveling and going to the Louvre today. He asks me a lot of questions, can't remember exactly what about, but we have a general conversation in my very, very poor French. I ask him why he's following me. Doesn't he have somewhere to be? This doesn't faze him. He smiles and carries on talking. Says he doesn't have anywhere to be. Okay. He starts saying I should go to dinner with him tonight. I say, great, in my head. That's not going to happen, so I decide to start playing around with the convo. I ask, do you smoke? He looks surprised and says, yes, do you? Keep in mind his English is really poor too. Which I thought was odd, because why would you attempt to talk to someone in English and find out about them if you can't do that well? Oh well, I look up weed in Google French and say, do you smoke weed? He looks slightly confused, but laughs and says, oh yes. You come with me and we can smoke later. I laugh too, thinking, alrighty mate. I don't smoke. This was funny, to throw him off a bit. He also doesn't know his way around, which was odd. I had no idea where the Louvre was. I wasn't bothered to ask his life story, so never found out where he came from. Anyway, I told him I have tickets already. I'm going straight in, and I don't know why you're following me. He doesn't mind this, and continues, says he'll wait for me. We can go to dinner later. You can come back to my apartment and meet my friends. We can smoke. Okay. We get there. My heart is beating a little faster at this point. I'm alone, in a different country. What do I do? Well, the entrance to the Louvre is a big open space full of people, which is slightly comforting. I finally see you get your tickets at a kiosk. This is the first time I straight up walk away, ignore him, and go there. There's an older guy who speaks English there, for tourists, obviously. And I say, hello, I'd like my ticket, blah blah. He could have been English for all I know, but my mind was going at too fast a pace to notice. The guy has now stood at a distance watching me. I look the man straight in the eye as he asks me a question and say, there is a man following me. His expression changes and we keep eye contact the entire time. He says, where? I say, to the far right. He glances and looks back at me. He asks a few questions. I say, well, I'm going there straight away, so what's he doing? He tells me to go straight in. Don't talk to him. Walk away. I agree. The guy suddenly comes right up to me and says, what's going on? Or something. We don't break eye contact, and the man says, are you going to be okay? I change tone and say, yes, thank you so much. The guy continues to follow me, but at this point I'm over it, and I leave him behind. Going down an escalator, I see him watching me and looking around. The weird kind of sad thing is, I tried to tell all the security they had, which was a lot. Down to the entrance, there's a man following me. What do I do? French lady behind the desk who stamps my ticket says, please make your way downstairs. Fine, with no one listening to me. I go to a security desk in the Louvre itself and say the same. The lady talks to me, asks my information, then proceeds to tell me he was probably trying to rob me. In broad daylight? Following me for over 30 minutes? Come on. There's a cold feeling all over my body at this point, but I'm safe and sound inside. They had numerous soldiers with guns walking around the place, and outside too, so to an extent I wasn't in serious danger. But once again, being alone, young, my hostel far away. If I told him where I was staying, which he continuously asked for, but I didn't tell him, something else could have happened entirely. And I'm so glad I got to enjoy the rest of my trip, save for the shooting, without much hassle. I still haven't told my parents. My mother would freak. I think about this story and wonder what would have happened if I'd listened to him. When I came out, as far as I could see, he wasn't there. So thankfully, I'll never find out. 3. This is the story of how I lost a friend who, at the time, seemed like one of the best I'd ever had, but later turned out to be toxic. My dad works as a custodial engineer in my town's middle school, and this boy was a volunteer who aided the custodians during the summer. Even before I met him, my dad would come home with the stories of a rather eccentric teenage boy named Tyler. Then one day he arrived at our house out of the blue. I had recently acquired my deceased great-uncle's record collection, and Tyler wondered if there were any Beatles records, since he was a huge fan of the band. As it so happened, there was a copy of the Hey Jude album which I let him have. I kind of regret that, considering how our friendship soured and how I now collect Beatles records myself. He came on very strongly, and the two of us soon bonded over our mutual interest in vinyl records. I introduced him to my favorite musicians, and he introduced me to his, of course, the Beatles in particular. Over the following weeks, Tyler would come to our house practically every day, and accompany my parents and I pretty much anywhere. We would even pay for his meals if he went to a restaurant. At first, we all had a great time, and he became like the brother I never had. The strange thing was, though, that through all this I never had an opportunity to meet his parents. It wasn't that I particularly wanted to, but he seemed to be going out of his way to prevent such a meeting from occurring. Once we even stopped at his house so he could pick something up, and he made me wait out on the deck while he went inside. When he did mention his family, he would say he was not like the rest of them. He also said that if we got on the wrong side of them, we'd never see him again. Big red flag there. Gradually things began to change as Tyler's fixation on an old tannery in town that was, and still is actually, progress has been incredibly slow, being demolished came to the surface. The reason for the fixation was that his mother was one of the literally thousands of people the tannery employed in its decades of operation. That was it. His family never owned it or anything. It was just that, like so many people living in this area, he had a relative who worked there at one time. Yet to him the tannery was his home. He even once proclaimed in front of a bemused neighbor that when he died he wanted to be buried on the grounds of the tannery. Seriously, it got to the point where this old, abandoned, and dilapidated tannery was the only place he wanted to go. He even started losing interest in the Beatles and shopping for records, which, along with model trains, had previously been his passion. Tyler arranged for the demolition crew to let us on the tannery property. And so we all went in. Most people would be satisfied with a brick or something, but he started carting out all sorts of junk as mementos, and putting it in a shed in our backyard. Apparently his parents didn't want him dragging the stuff home, but it was okay to dump it all in our property. We didn't have a problem with it in the beginning, but it was getting to the point where it was excessive amounts of what was basically debris filling up our shed. My mom and dad were understandably rather fed up with it all. And it wasn't just the tannery situation. One night my dad fell down the stairs and we took him to the hospital to be sure he was okay. Tyler happened to be at the house, and instead of accompanying us to the hospital, my mom thought it best if Tyler went home, as it was a school night. But he called his dad, who actually said he could go. It was quite late, around 12, so my dad went in to have some tests done, and meanwhile Tyler, my mom, and I went to the hospital cafeteria. Tyler piled his tray full, and in the end, my dad was stuck with a bill of over $30 for food, around $15 of which was Tyler's. We went to check in on my dad, and Tyler was running his mouth so much that my dad only half-jokingly remarked, "I can't even die in peace." My mom decided that she had to take Tyler home so he would be able to get up and go to school in the morning. My poor dad, who was found to be all right, ended up having to pay for a cab to bring him home that night. Then Tyler asked my mom to go through her late grandfather's old business ledger. He was a sign painter, and Tyler wondered if he ever did work for the tannery. This was a more difficult thing for my mom to do than she let on, as she was very close to her grandfather, and reviewing his career brought all her grief at his death back to the surface. As it turned out, there were 2 transactions with the tannery. One night, Tyler excitedly gave my mom a call, saying he found a sign that likely was painted by her grandfather. We met up with him and a man who worked for the demolition company. But Tyler immediately approached and put a hand up to stop my mom from coming any closer. She was not allowed to even look at this sign. Of all the junk Tyler had pulled out of this tannery, and we allowed him to store in our property, the one thing we were interested in having, we were not allowed to take. They even refused money for it, and they wouldn't give us any explanation as to why. However, we did hear that the parents of the man who accompanied Tyler that night were antique dealers. Make of that what you will. The emotional experience of having what was possibly a piece of her grandfather's work being dangled before her, and then taken away, caused my mom to finally lose her temper. Though it wasn't so much at Tyler as it was Mr. Antique Dealer's son. Still, it seemed that Tyler sided with Mr. Antique Dealer's son, and the two of them left together with the sign in tow. Later, my mom did call and apologize to Tyler, and he seemed to accept her apology. She told him that though she thought of him as family, that sometimes family members had arguments, and also that it was mostly Mr. Antique Dealer's son she was angry with anyway. Even so, we saw less of Tyler after that. One day, he and his father came to pick up the remaining stuff from the tannery we still had in our shed. Though Tyler claimed everything was all right, his father seemed not to have gotten the memo. My mom came out the front door, and Tyler began to approach her, amiably, only for his father to shout, "Get in the damn truck!" and off they went. One day I innocently attempted to call Tyler's house. He didn't have a cell phone to speak with him, thinking everything had been worked out. His mother answered, and when she realized who it was, boy was she mad. All of a sudden she flew into a tirade. "You made him dirty. Now he knows what kind of friends you are. Don't call here anymore." I was completely blindsided. First, I was not at all involved in the argument between my mom, Tyler, and Mr. Antique Dealer's son. Secondly, any normal person should have understood how my mom would have been upset in that situation. That maybe this woman's 15-year-old son needed to be reprimanded for disrespecting an adult the way he had done there. Third, my mom did apologize, and Tyler supposedly was okay with that. Keep in mind that neither myself, my dad, or my mom ever met Tyler's parents, not even to this day. They allowed him to hang around with us all this time without really caring about the whereabouts of their teenage son. We were good to him, did a lot for him, and tolerated some things perhaps even more than we should have. Then, when he finally pushed my mom to the limit of her patience and she yelled at him once, suddenly we're the bad guys. Honestly, you'd have thought maybe his parents would have been apologetic that he had been bothering us by coming around so often. Though of course initially it was no trouble at all. We have never been given an opportunity to explain ourselves. I have no clue what Tyler's parents have heard about my parents and me, but for whatever reason they completely despise us, without ever having spoken more than 20 words or so to us. During the next few years, my parents and I managed to secretly remain in touch with Tyler, communicating through the occasional online message or birthday card with no return address. And he would send friendly messages back. When he turned 18, I had some hope that he would finally defy his parents and visit us, as they no longer had any say in what he did as he was now an adult. I congratulated him via online message on his graduation from high school. His response was, "Thank you. How was you and your mom?" I said we were doing well and that we missed him. A month later, I decided to write and directly invite him to come back and see us if he wanted. And to my bewilderment, I received 3 bizarre, seemingly out-of-character messages in succession. First message, "I prefer not to." Second message, "I have a wonderful, beautiful girlfriend, and I really would not like to be around your family." Third message, "Now please leave me alone." Okay, I understand if he feels he still can't associate with us, for fear of his parents' anger. But then came the next 2 messages, and I'm like, what the heck? So he has a wonderful, beautiful girlfriend. Good for him. But what was the point of bringing that up? He may have had romantic ideas about me, but I only ever regarded him like a brother at most, and never intentionally led him on. Due to the sudden and weird change of attitude, as well as the fact that the grammar in these messages is a lot better than his generally is, I suspect that maybe his mother has finally discovered the online messaging system he was using. In any case, I think it's finally time to let this friendship go. It's just not worth dealing with those psycho parents. And writing this all up has helped me remember what a toxic friend Tyler was to begin with. I realize I really don't miss him like I thought I did, and I don't want him in my life anymore. There was one good thing that came out of all this, though. I am now a big fan of the Beatles. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 422. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. The last story there I've been holding on to for quite a while now, actually. I know it wasn't the most super duper scary, but I think, there was enough weirdness in there I thought it would be okay. I was going to do a Bad Friends video, so I'd been holding on to it for that. But I'm having a lot of trouble finding the right kind of stories for it, so it came to my rescue today, because otherwise there may not have been a True Scaries video today. And it just fit in perfectly. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.